Welcome to From the Trenches, success shortcuts revealed by real world innovators crushing it right now. I'm your host, Scott Hartley, and we're back with another episode packed with actionable strategies from today's most successful entrepreneurs. If you're tired of generic business advice and ready for real cutting edge tactics that are working right now, you're in the right place. And I'm so excited to have one of my fellow Titans members on the call today. I've been trying to get him on the call for a while, and we've finally been able to get our schedules to mesh here. But I'd like to introduce you to Gabe Arnold. Now, Gabe has always had a passion for connecting businesses with the best possible solutions. And so enter Business Marketing Engine. These days at BME, Gabe creates affordable long-term marketing and technology solution for businesses of all sizes. And over the past 15 years, Gabe has built his experience in professional writing, web and computer technology, and marketing campaign creation and management. After working with over 1,000 startups and hundreds of established businesses over the past decade, Gabe set himself apart as a CEO who goes to great lengths to help fellow entrepreneurs achieve their goals. Gabe, I'm so excited that we were able to get connected here and get you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I've been looking forward to this. I'm excited.
Absolutely. So just to kind of set the scene. How long have you been in Titans?
6 years, coming on seven, I think. A little
Six,
while.
going on six, going on seven. Awesome. So you're kind
Yep.
of like one of the founding members that when Brian started that. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, as I recall, as soon as he announced it, I was like, I can join that. That sounds like my kind of group. So yeah, I've been there a while.
Yeah. Well, I'm going on, I think this is my second year that I'm in, so I'll be going on my third year in November. But I tell you what, I have met so many amazing people like yourself, just to have the opportunity to almost every week, at least twice a month, where we get together and just kind of, hear what each other's doing, sharing wins, sharing challenges, and then also being able to pour into each other. And you step up a lot whenever other Titans members have questions or they're looking for advice. You're one of the ones that's always raising your hand and saying, hey, let me chime in, I've got some thoughts to share with you. And it's always really good stuff because you've got a wealth of experience, like I read in your bio, like you've got all this experience working with startups and established businesses.
Yeah, I'm always happy to help because the way I've learned through all my failures and mistakes. They're super valuable, and I've had amazing mentors like Brian and other great people in the group and outside the group. So anytime I can at least offer my experience, I'm happy to help. And I always tell people, take what I share, take my advice, and sit with it and make like align it to where you're at. Because one of
Hmm.
the mistakes I've made early in my entrepreneurial journey is thinking, oh, I can literally copy and paste that over here, and it doesn't quite work like that as I know now, and I think a lot of people know, but. I'm always happy to help and just I always tell people sit with it and see what feels aligned and throw out the stuff that doesn't work. And if you can take something valuable out of it, then I'm glad I got to help.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why they call it the word model for a reason,
Yeah,
not, copy paste, right?
exactly. I missed that part, but yes, that's the truth.
If life were just simply copy and paste, there would be so many more successful people and we'd all have a lot fewer headaches,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
So, well, I'd really like to spend our time today because not too long ago, in Titans, you really shared, really personal story about your entrepreneurial journey. And I think, a lot of the insights that you shared there, I mean, that touched a lot of us in the Titans group that I think getting that message out to my audience and everybody that's listening here will have an impact on so many business owners. So I'm just going to kind of turn it over to you. I'll interject some questions as you're kind of going along, but kind of tell us, how did you get started in all of this world of marketing and what are some of these challenges that you faced and overcome?
Yeah, so when I was like 12, 13, 14, I ended up racking up like $1,000+ bill in dial-up charges for my parents and got in huge trouble. But that was probably the origin of when I really started messing with technology because somebody had given us an old, Windows machine. I forget what it was, probably Windows 98 is my guess, or something like that. But I was just fascinated by technology and fascinated with the fact that I could get online and talk to people around the world, and it was just incredible to me. And out of, spending all that money and learning all the things I did and getting into trouble plenty too, that's where I started figuring out, oh, like websites are what we need right now. And so
Mhm.
by the time I was like 15 or 16 years old, I was building and selling websites, and it was in Yahoo Site Builder for all of us that have been around a long time, and for
Yep.
younger people, that was like the original website building platform.
Hmm.
And so I built and sold a website for $3,000 to a local manufacturing company. And I thought, man, this technology stuff's probably going to take off. And from there, I ended up. My grandfather was one of my biggest influences in my father figure as a child, and he ran a construction company. So I ended up hanging out with him through, from like 8, 9 years old. I spent time with him every day, and into my teens, and learned the trades. And so I ended up opening up a construction company officially when I turned 18. I was doing a lot of it before then.
Hmm.
And building that business, I did all through online advertising, which was a new concept, but it was I think it was called Lead Magic back then, and now it's Home Advisor. They bought or rebranded or something.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I drove all my sales through that and through like early SEO stuff I was learning. I ran that business until 2007, and I had some larger clients who were starting to get hit with like the credit issues and all the things that happened in the housing market crash of '07, '08, and in that season. Ended up going bankrupt and losing that business because I understood sales and marketing, but I didn't understand all the things of operations and financial control and all the things I needed to learn. Uh,
Hmm.
and so went bankrupt, and it had a lot of things going on personally in that season too. But as I closed the company up and I'm saying, well, I've got a few $100 to my name, and what am I going to do next? And I was like, well, I love the tech and the marketing and all that stuff. So I'm like, well, I might as well shift to that because I love it. I know how to do it.
Hmm.
And that was really the origin of what is today, business marketing engine because my agency, because I just started building websites and that was my main focus. And then I started building some smaller software applications and things like that.
Hmm.
But I got a few years into building and selling websites and realized, well, I can build, at the time they were industry standard, beautiful websites. Or if you were to find them, they would look a little dated, obviously. But I would go back a year or so later and nothing had changed. They hadn't marketed, they hadn't promoted. And I was like, oh, I can build a great website, but there's no point. Like,
Right.
so that's when we started adding in content marketing and SEO. Ultimately, over the years, adding in social media and paid advertising. And then actually, when I connected with Brian years ago before he had the Titans group, I started realizing, oh, there's a lot that I can do in offline media and direct mail and things like that. And so the first few years of the business, it was kind of a side venture while I was working on some other things. And then, yeah, about 15 years ago now is when I made marketing engine my full-time focus,
Hmm.
um, and ended up really leaning into that, and that's been my main business for years. And really, as I look at it, like the evolution of it, people always ask me like, "Well, how'd you get here? How'd you get into it?" I've always just wanted to go in and talk to the business owner and say like, "What's your problem? What are you trying to solve? Like, what's the next thing you need? Do you need more customers? Okay, great. Let's focus on marketing and figure out what you need there. If you need a technology solution of your website or software, or other things like what's the gap, and just sit down and just have conversations and say, what are the challenges? What are the goals? And that's evolved, my services over the years.
Yeah. When you have those conversations, because we all know that there's no shortage of businesses that have problems, right? It's going to look a little bit different for every business as to what their needs are at that particular moment. But there's always something that needs to be solved that that business owner either doesn't know how to solve or just doesn't have the time or the knowledge, in being able to do that.
Yeah, and a longtime friend and mentor of mine, Alex Charfen, has said for years, he's like, your business will always be broken, and if you do really well, that will always be the case.
Hmm.
I'm butchering how he says it, but it's along those lines. And the reason for that is like every time we grow, we'll break something operationally, or what's working for marketing today, if you want to expand and scale or do something else, isn't going to work tomorrow.
Yep.
There's always going to be a shift and change, and so that's a good reminder to me always is like if you're growing and you're successful, you'll always have challenges in your business. Something will break as soon as you're successful in one area. Like if sales and marketing takes off, then operations has strain. And then
Yep.
if you operations stable and smooth and everything's good there, then you're like, oh, we have more capacity. We need more sales and marketing. Those are just two simple examples, but it's a good reminder to me that there's always going to be things broken for clients that we serve and even internally in our own business.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you mentioned that your first business went bankrupt because you had the sales and marketing knowledge, which drives, business. But on the operation side, you said, that was something that you didn't fully understand at that time.
Yeah.
what transpired between the time that you shut down that business to the time that you launched BME, even kind of like as that side hustle? What did you do to get your chops up on the operation side? How did you learn like, oh, these are the things that I didn't realize that I needed and started working on those?
Yeah, that was probably one of the first times I can remember being self-aware enough to go, oh, like clearly this end of the business didn't work because if I had it, I probably could have survived. I mean, there's plenty of stable, well-run businesses that survived the housing market crash. I didn't. And so I have said for years, and I would say was probably the origin point, if there's any problems in your business, just look in the mirror. Like that's the first place you should look. And so I did that and really sat with it. And I realized that I had no financial intelligence. And then
Mm,
I had the wrongfully assumed that you could just if finances aren't great, just sell more, which that won't change any behavior. It won't change financial process. Like if you don't have anything in place, that's going to be the problem. And so that's where I just really dug in deep and started looking at like how do you do budgeting? What are the financial principles that you need to have in place? What kind of profitability is industry standard, and what do I want? Because
mhm,
I hear people say, well, there's only typically only X percentage margin in this industry. And I always challenge that and say, well, what do you want or need? Because just because it's done that way doesn't mean you can't optimize something or re-engineer the process or look at, where you can create better margin.
mhm,
So I spent the next 2 or 3 years like going really deep in that and getting a foundation to help me understand that every dollar that comes into my business has to have a job and has to have an intentional job. And if I'm not intentional with, where the money's going, then you're going to have leakage and problems and mismanagement. And so early on, I read a book called Profit First, which I think is a great primer for the mentality and principles of, financial management. I,
mhm,
I personally don't think it scales very well, or I think there's some gaps in the application, but the principle is right.
mhm.
Um, I also started using personally and professionally a tool. It's built for personal finances, but I think it has some relevance depending on the size of the business too. I started using a tool called YNAB, which is You Need a Budget.
Hmm.
It stands for that. And I just started saying, all right, like I clearly didn't have the skill here. So how do I up level my skill? And that really turned things around because it took me a few years to get stable, and then I would say it probably took me 5+ years to create a model and a financial system that actually supported where I wanted to go and
Sure.
helped me have process for our finances because I knew back then like you have to have process for delivery, and I've invested and improved that over the years. But I before that, before going bankrupt, I didn't realize you have to have a process for finances, which is just my ignorance. It's it seems obvious now, but I
Right.
think as entrepreneurs to go, oh, here's a problem, I can solve it and make up a number to sell. Yeah.
Hmm.
But if you don't look back and say, all right, well, if I sell 50 of these, what's the profitability? And, how am I going to staff it? Or, where am I really going? And so that was where I spent my time is like really leveling up my own financial intelligence.
Yeah. And I think, a statement that you made there is really important. A lot of times that we have that erroneous thinking where it's like, I can just sell my way out of this problem,
Yeah.
and that's usually not the case. I mean, sales are important, don't get me wrong, but selling your way out of the problem means that you've got to have everything else all buttoned up and everything fine-tuned so that nothing's falling through the cracks somewhere else.
Yeah, and I don't think our society as a whole or our education system in the United States and honestly around the world, I'm not sure either. I don't think that there's the adequate focus on like financial intelligence and understanding budgeting and doing all those things. So
Hmm.
when I get to, support another entrepreneur or talk to them or look at their financial model, which we do when we're marketing to say, hey, if we sell more of these, this is actually good. Is the
Yeah.
pricing right? It's all going to function. And I just tell people it's a skill. So like let go of any guilt or shame and let go of where family of origin beliefs about money, let go of what society says and build a skill set because it's just like you and I have done a lot of email marketing that takes years of practice. It
Hmm.
takes years of learning, it takes trying and failing. And so financial intelligence is just another skill set, but unfortunately I don't think it gets the attention that it needs in
Yeah.
in entrepreneurial circles. And then we end up thinking sometimes we're being successful and we could be selling something at a loss and we're digging a hole and we don't even know
Yeah,
it.
and that's one of the things that I love. I'm involved with a program here in my county called CEO, so creating entrepreneurial opportunities, and it's for high school juniors and seniors, and they basically get baptized by fire with starting their own business. So in the first semester, it's a class business. They all work together to, come up with an idea and sell it and, actually create revenue. And then in the spring semesters, they're individual businesses. But part of that is they have to learn is in the class this past year, they did a tie blanket business. And so, they would go and they would source their materials from Joann's Fabric, in a nearby city. Well, when they first got their pricing, guess what? The fabric was on sale. But then
Yeah,
they started getting more orders. Well, those sales don't last forever. Now it's at, higher price. So they had to figure out like, what's our real pricing going to be so that we can still be profitable. We can't just base it upon, oh, I got this deal, this one time, right?
exactly. Yep. There's so many different factors inside of pricing effectively and delivery. And we don't always think about, what are the customer service aspects, depending on what kind of service you're running. Or if you're selling a product, you either have like project management and client, management, or, you've got warehousing and you've got fulfillment and packaging and shipping if you're selling product. I mean, there's all these little pieces that
Hmm.
you won't know about till you get into it or until you sit down and talk to somebody that's done it for a while. And if you're astute enough to pay attention and figure out what they're explaining to you, they're going to uncover the big, broad spectrum of what's involved in actually delivering something to a customer.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've been, with BME basically full time. So roughly, what about 15, 17 years ish now? What's some of the challenges that you've experienced? I know that you mentioned during the Titans call that you had, some personal challenges. Had a health issue. What are some of the things that you learned during some of the struggles in your early years and getting that going?
Yeah, I think this is a perpetual challenge in a good way, but when we start out, we're doing everything. We wear all the hats and like that's part of entrepreneurship. It's a reality. But what I learn every year is like, oh, I need to relearn delegation. So I started the company in 2007, so we'll be 18 in another couple of weeks here. We're finally adults or almost. Um, and what I was doing early on, I could do a lot of it myself, and we had different revenue and a much smaller staff, years ago.
Hmm.
Um, as I've grown, what I've realized is a couple things. One, when we read about, I read about all the entrepreneurial figures that I like to learn from, like, Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, or you go back farther in history, read about, Henry Ford and all those guys. We don't always have a clear understanding or picture that they got there by asking for help from the right people. And
Hmm.
so that's another, myth I've encountered, at least in my walk, is we see everybody, or we read about people that have had massive success and they're the focal point and they deserve it. They've launched huge companies and they have the success, but we don't always get to hear about the key players, the key people that came in to support and help, which is why I like to read the deeper, broader biographies when I can. But
Hmm.
even those don't highlight that. That's not the focus all the time. And so my challenges, throughout the years have been one, like learning that I have to relearn delegation every stage of growth because what I'm delegating today, is important and I need to delegate that effectively. But once I delegate that, then I'll grow and learn something new and want to take the company to the next stage of growth. And then I'll have some level of mastery, understanding, or hit that growth point. And then if I want to grow again, I have to delegate that.
Hmm.
Um, and so investing in leadership has been absolutely always the best investment I've made. I didn't understand that early on. And a key thing that I did there that has been massively successful and just like a huge point of leverage that I would have never guessed is 7 or 8 years ago, I had a friend challenge me to write down the guiding principles for the company. And I was like, what do you mean? I don't even know what you're talking about. And I used to think like, mission, vision, statement, values,
Hmm.
guiding principles were just corporate speak.
Right.
Um, they can be if you just write them and never look at them or use them. But going through this exercise, I realized that creating and writing out the principles for your company is a way to duplicate decision making. And that's the one of the biggest things that I would encourage people to look at is you have all this knowledge experience if you're the founder of the company or one of the main principals, like you have all this knowledge and experience that just comes second nature to you. And at least for me, I assume everybody knows what's in my head. I still do that today and I have to
Right.
find
It's so
myself,
easy to do that.
they don't know and I need to explain it. And so in writing our guiding principles, I think I had 9 or 10 to start and they've evolved over the years and I think we have 17 now. um, I realized if I can write a principle, then that, is truly a principle, because I think principles are these infinite living things when we find them,
Hmm.
then I can teach my team to think through the principles and not come to me to make every decision. Because if I'm making every decision, we will make poor decisions as a company from decision fatigue or lack of context. Like the
Hmm.
person doing the work is going to have the best context and best information.
Yeah.
So, some of our principles, our first guiding principle is relationships first. Like, we actively listen and, invest in the relationship, and we listen before we respond is what the principle says. And just having that in place helps us think more effectively. It also allows us when we're in a challenging situation with a client or another team member or a vendor to say like, let's invest in the relationship and get aligned as people, and then we can solve the problem. Because
Mhm.
otherwise, we can get fixated on the frustrating or challenging parts. Um, Another principle is positive confrontation. Like we believe that we can positively confront a situation, and that if we actively positively confront something, we can solve it faster than ignoring it. And
Hmm.
so those are just a couple of the ones we have. But in documenting those and talking about them every single week, since we put them in place, we talk about them on our all team meetings that we have. We have 3 all team huddles throughout the week. And when we talk about those, then I'm reinforcing and reminding people this is how we think, this is how we operate. And that tool has been massively powerful. And I will always have that in place in any company I'm involved in because, again, if you can duplicate decision making, you create leverage. And so I didn't understand, 10, 15 years ago that I was the bottleneck for everything. I had to make all the decisions. And again, like you can't make effective decisions if you're making them all. And you
Right.
can't make effective decisions compared to somebody that's on the front line when they're fresh in front of it, have all the context, and they're dealing with something directly. And so that was definitely something that was a challenge. And then I realized, oh, this is a good path forward.
Yeah. Delegation, I think, is a challenge for all of us because, I think most of us have this mindset that we need to overcome is that I'm the only person that can do it this way. I'm the
Yes.
only person that can do it the best way. And that's not really true. Like you said, they have all of the information and they can't relay all of that information to us to delegate or to make that decision. But, what you shared, a lot of times when we hear about delegation, it's like you have to have processes and systems in place. And those are important for the delegation. But what you're highlighting here is that it goes beyond
Yep.
just the process and the system. It really is a mindset thing. You're teaching your employees, your staff, here's how you think, here's how you approach every situation.
Yeah, and with principles in place, then you can really invest in leadership, which is mindset and belief, and how do we solve these problems, and how do I think? And another thing that we did a handful of years ago, and we now take new team members through periodically, is we did a book study on extreme ownership,
Mm.
which is an awesome leadership book, and I did that 3 or 4 years ago the first time, and I saw an immediate lift in profit and revenue, and I was like, holy cow, like we had our principles which are strong, and then I put this in place. And that's really the place that you get leverage because like you said, you can't have all the context of everything, and otherwise you might as well be in every meeting every day and do it all yourself, which is
Right.
really foolish. You'll burn yourself out quick and you'll never scale your company. But by doing that, by putting principles in place and then consistently investing in leadership, we do different book studies and different things throughout the course of the year now. Now, I'm in a position where I can actually delegate process creation and get a much, much better result for the company than thinking I need to create the process and then delegate it. Which
Hmm.
there's seasons and there's projects and there's things where we need to do that as founders. Like we have the vision, we need to document it, we need to go through the process and see what works and then hand it off. And I do that on occasion still. But
Hmm.
now with principles and with leadership, I can coach outcomes and say, this is the outcome result we want. And go figure it out and come back to me and I'll support you. And like that's really high leverage, delegation. Because when we delegate something, we have to be crystal clear on the outcome. We have to be crystal clear on the timeline that we need to hit that within. And then we have to be clear on here's the resources that you have to get there. And ultimately, if you delegate that way effectively, you can say, here's the outcome I want, here's resources, here's the things you need to know. Then when I'm early on with a leader, I will check in with them once a week or every 2 weeks, inside of the timeline and say, how are you progressing? And in those times when I'm checking in with somebody, it's easy to, say, well, here's what you should do.
Hmm.
But then you're not investing in leadership, you're dictating, and just that you might as well, eventually we could just buy robots for that, right? We're pretty close.
Right.
We have robots for some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, in AI. But the reality is, instead of doing that, my intention is, and what I work on practicing consistently is, if they come back and give me a status update or show me how they're progressing, then I will ask them questions to help them come to the solution And oftentimes, I would say 80% of the time, they come up with a better solution than I ever could just dictating what's in my head. And
Hmm.
that's leverage across a team. Um, I I believe, and it's I know what age of AI we're in right now saying this, but I believe that you'll never replace that with technology or AI because
Right.
as humans, we have such an ability to abstract things and create, and our experiences come into play. But if we really look at the foundational things of what makes a team successful and a culture successful, having principles, teaching leadership, and delegating with that intention, then you can bring out something so much better than you could ever have dreamed up yourself when you invest in the right people. And that's been, fortunately, I've had amazing mentors that have invested and taught me leadership since I was 9, 10 years old. I'm so grateful. I still work with one of my mentors and longtime friends now, who met me when I was like 10 years old, and a few years later said, "Hey, you want to be in this leadership group with me?" Um, it was amazing because like I would have never had the visibility or the understanding of what the power of leadership in business and in life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, some of your takeaways here. So, like early on, it was the financial thing. It's like, I've got to master the financial aspect of things. And then, now you're kind of in those early years of BME. It's like, okay, I've got to figure out the delegation piece.
Yep.
It's like, okay, those are two critical foundations for you to be able to scale your company. As we kind of like start to wrap up here, what's maybe a third area that you've, had a challenge and figured out how you need to overcome that?
The biggest challenge that I faced in the last few years, and I spent a lot of time investing in and making significant progress finally, is delegating sales. Because I know, at least for me, and I know a lot of founders, like you're the revenue driver, you're the salesperson, and I've sold things since I was a kid, so it's second nature to me.
Hmm.
Um, that's a scenario where I've learned, again, a trusted advisor told me this years ago, and I didn't totally get it, and then I got it a couple years later. But he said, "You need to delegate the thing you're the best at." And I was like, "Why would I do that?" Um, but the reality is, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've realized like I'm starting to hit a ceiling of revenue in the company if I'm still the driver of the biggest contracts, the biggest deals.
Hmm.
And the challenge there has been, and I've systematically worked my way through it, and I feel like the end of the project is in sight, is realizing that I had to go back and decode everything I did. Because if it's a second nature skill, and if you have unconscious competence in something, then that's great because you can walk in any room and do your thing or
Hmm.
whatever, but you don't necessarily have the structure and framework to teach that.
Yeah.
And so when we're super strong at something, we have to have awareness, or I at least encourage, and I've learned, have the awareness that that could be a weak point in the future if you don't start to break down and decode that. And so I started that process by hiring a sales consultant that, went through my calls with me and showed me what I was doing effectively and things I could grow in. Out of that, I built process, and like layer by layer, I've really pulled out like, here's how I do it and what I do so that
Hmm.
I can replicate that into the team. And so that's been a massive challenge. I've probably spent $500,000 on that project, of figuring out what works and what doesn't work, but systematically, piece by piece, I've uncovered that. And I think I'm a year, 18 months away from not having to be the primary revenue driver in the business. And I'm excited about that. And the other big lesson out of that is, as entrepreneurs, we're wired to want to solve problems. And I think we have a ton of optimism and, persistence and things like that. But this has been one of the major projects where I've had to say, I'm going to keep leveling up my skill of delegating something that I'm so good at, I don't know how to delegate. And that's like, weird saying out loud, but that's the reality is that I've had to just say, I'm going to keep figuring out the next level, the next thing, and I'm going to keep trying until I figure it out. And it's taken tons of failure, tons of mistakes. I've invested a ton of money. I believe all my failures that I've spent money on are part of my entrepreneurial education. So I have millions in my entrepreneurial education, but that's one that I'm like, I'm just going to keep showing up. I'm going to keep asking for help. I'm going to keep working on it until I solve it. And that's my encouragement to people is there's going to be areas in the business that, again, if you look in the mirror, you're the source of that, which is good news because if it's my fault, I can solve it.
Right.
If I say it's somebody else's fault, then I'm totally screwed.
Yep.
If I'm a victim, then I might as well give up now because I can't solve it. But looking in the mirror every day and saying I'm going to take the next step on solving that has been an amazing challenge. It's been super rewarding, and there's been really hard parts where I've like, well, there's another 10 grand or another 50 grand or whatever the number is in my education around solving this. But I'm never going to give up on it. And like because of that, plenty of people, that aren't entrepreneurs would look in and say like, you should give up. You got hundreds of thousands of dollars in trying to solve this. But for me, I'm committed to leveling up my skill and growing as a leader,
Hmm.
and because of that, I will solve it. Like I said, I can see the finish line finally. So that's
Yeah.
been really
Sometimes
kind
you kind of wonder, it's like, am I even approaching it? But it
of,
kind of goes back to that old adage. It's like a lot of times we give up when we're so close to that breakthrough and we just don't realize that we're so close to that breakthrough, but it's kind of our human nature that we hit that wall and then we're like, we take the advice of the non-entrepreneurs. It's like, oh, I'll just give up, go do something else, try a different way.
yeah, we all have those moments if we're honest with ourselves, and that's where, as well, we're in the same community together. Like having a community of entrepreneurs around you, I think is so crucial if you want to make it, because you can't grow and scale a business in the long term year over year if you don't have peers around you that have been through this stuff, if you don't have support, and if you're not in a place where it's encouraged to ask for help, you'll
Mhm.
foolishly think, as I have in years past, oh, I got to solve this all myself, and that's a great way to burn out and get nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. Now, question on, kind of the decoding process, because, I think that, this is something I know that I, struggle with, but like you said, is that you have this innate ability to do this thing. Like you don't have to think about it. It's just like, okay, so you tell me the problem, boom, I can pinpoint, okay, here's the cause, here's here's what we need to do to solve it. What's kind of been at a high level, what's kind of been your process to be able to get that out of your head and to be able to actually define what it is that you're actually doing?
One of the most effective things that I've done a lot over the last couple of years is to one, I try to record everything I do, because obviously with AI in the mainstream, it's really nice to have videos and transcripts to analyze things.
Right?
But the key piece there is actually less about AI, and is if I record my sales calls, which we've been doing that for 6 or 7 years,
Hmm.
I can then pull up a call that went well or didn't go well with my sales department, and we can play a couple minutes of it and stop it. And I can say, what do you think I did there? And by me sitting third party and watching myself, I can notice, things that went well, that I was effective in, things that, weren't helpful for the process. And so that's the first thing I would say, is find a way to like observe yourself kind of sitting third party and
Hmm.
see what you did and then document it. And also, if, having that by me teaching it, I uncover things I would have never noticed if I did that alone. So having the other person you want to teach they'll ask questions that I thought were obvious or I didn't think about, or any, the whole spectrum of questions.
Hmm.
So that's been a big piece of decoding it. The other thing that I've continually learning and working on is the realization that I can move super, super fast on something. Just like you and I could probably sit down in a short amount of time and plug in all the DNS and do all the email validation and do all that tech stuff.
Hmm.
'Cause we've done it. I don't know how many times I've done that. Hundreds, maybe thousands of times. But just because I have this broad knowledge and experience doesn't mean that I can replicate that in a team member quickly, or that I should.
Hmm.
So I've learned not only to like record and analyze and teach from what I did, and then have the team member document back what they learned, because they'll learn it faster and it's usually a better product than if I sit down and, do that piece.
Hmm.
But also I've learned that it's important to realize that as the entrepreneur, I have the broad vision, I have the skill, I have the experience. It's often wiser to like choose a channel or a chunk of that and say, I'll just teach you to do this part of it, because non-entrepreneurial personality types aren't wired like we are, and so they don't necessarily jump and shift contexts and do a bunch of different things at the same time,
Hmm.
or pick up all these different skills. And so narrowing the focus for the team members I'm training has been really helpful too.
Mm. Yeah, that's something that, I don't know that I would have even thought about, is like, okay, I want to offload this thing. And so it's offload the whole thing. Whereas, like you said, if they're not the entrepreneurial type, maybe it's just this particular piece that you need to assign to them and get them trained up on.
Yeah, and we look at any big companies that scale, they have specialists. So like
Yeah.
one of my mentors spent almost 2 decades working at Progressive Insurance, and so that's how I know some of the stuff, because I've never worked there. But you start there and like you start making phone calls off a script, and that's all you do, and that's good, and you're specialized at that. Over time, you can learn like the next level of claims management for insurance claims, and like progressively you can add skills. But when we look at a company, it's a team of people that are specialized, hyper specialized in something, so
Hmm.
that they can get really skilled in it, they can get really strong in it. And fortunately, through trial and error and lots of learning and great mentors. Like I learned that because I mean, our designers, our developers, our copywriters, our project managers, they're world class at what they do.
Yeah.
But but we shouldn't all be entrepreneurs in my company. That would be chaos.
Right.
I look at what they're producing, and it's hundreds of times better than what I produced when I was doing it all because they
Mhm.
have the time and focus, and they have that passion, and they love, going deeper on that. And so, anything that I've, learned to delegate, I'm slowly learning to go, oh, is this one role that I'm going to delegate, or is this three or four roles? And so, in my sales journey of like learning to offload sales and do that, I actually uncovered like three or four roles that I was doing inside and the sales role. So we
Mhm.
hired operational people to be marketing strategists and account managers and all these things that I had just rolled up into one. I was like, oh, I can teach somebody to do this, which didn't work.
Right.
It was like five people's work.
Yeah,
Um, and I was doing it maybe a 60-70% effective level, but I could only do so much of it.
sure.
Uh, and so that's been a big learning for me for sure.
And when it comes to delegation, so one of the questions that just came to mind is, um, as you've grown your company, because I mean, you obviously have a lot of different skill sets. I mean, you can do websites, you can do programming, you can do AI stuff, you can do all these different things. You can do sales, the finances, so on and so forth. In your company, have you basically been um, delegating the stuff that you've been doing, or are you also going out and just hiring somebody for a particular role that they already have expertise in, and then you plug them in? Like we have a need for this particular thing. What's kind of been the bulk of your journey there?
Yeah, both ways. Early on, 10, 15 years ago, I would bring in somebody that I had thought had the right character and attitude and, aptitude and some of the skill, and I would coach and train and bring them up. And the advantage there is that you can usually bring somebody in a more affordable rate. You don't have to hire top tier.
Mm-hmm.
You can embed them in your culture. You can teach them the way you want to do things. And that served us well for a season. I would say a few years ago, we really shifted focus to saying we want to bring in experts in this, and then we move that way. So I think it depends on what stage of business you're in,
Mm-hmm.
what your labor budgets are, like what you can afford. But in the ideal, I've definitely learned, if you can hire somebody that has, higher level skill and expertise to take something off, then you don't have to do as much training and delegation around that stuff. You can really just coach outcomes and say, here's the outcome we need, here's the expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the ideal, but I also think there's value, and it depends on the stage of the business where it's totally worth bringing somebody in, mentoring them and coaching them and teaching them. And if you're intentional about your culture and the principles and the leadership you do, a lot of those people will stay with you. I have people that have been with me 10 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, but you also run the risk of you train somebody and they leave. And I've had that happen too, and that's okay. Like that's part of the process. But
Yeah.
uh, it's been kind of both sides in the season I'm in now, and in the ideal, I would say, which not all aspects of the journey as an entrepreneur are ideal, as we know. The more skill and experience you can hire, like with inside your budget, of course, that's ideal because then you're not training from the ground up and like delegating outcomes and not delegating and training skills.
Yeah, got it. Awesome. Well, Gabe, this has been a very insightful conversation. Some things that we touched upon here that we didn't get to in your Titans presentation. Is there any final wisdom that you'd like to share before we wrap for today?
Yeah, I would say the investment that you make in yourself is always going to be reflected in the business. So take time to just sit down and say, like, if I'm taking an honest look, where are the gaps I have, and ask other entrepreneurs around you that have seen you operate. Do ask family and friends, like, and take everybody's feedback, and then say what part of the feedback was helpful. Because,
Hmm.
you know, you and I could give each other feedback. We've known each other for a little while, but some of it may not be relevant. We haven't like worked on large projects for a decade.
Right.
Um, so I'll like filter that feedback, but ask people for feedback, identify your skill gaps, and then say, I'm going to invest in one or two skills for the next year. And that's something I've done for a long time is I just focus on one skill that I really want to, level up in. And
Hmm.
by just staying focused for what feels like a long time, a year may feel like a long time, but really investing in one or two things for a year will catapult your growth if you stay focused on it.
Yeah, I think, that's an important point that you make is that you can identify a lot of different areas where you can have improvement, but where you're really going to see the difference is when you focus in on one or two things rather than try to tackle all of those. Because we always, overestimate what we can accomplish, in a very short period of time, but we underestimate, what the results can be if we just focus on, just one thing and really do it very well, right?
Absolutely. Yep. The old saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast always applies. And you're exactly right. Like we think we can accomplish, 47 things in a week, which we usually can't.
Right.
Um, if
I still
we
try, but
do, but if we do one or two things for a year, it's incredible leverage. And so I get all that feedback and then I say, what's the highest leverage thing that if I just work on that will make a big difference? And then if you spend a year working on something, you will have skill in it and it will stay with
Mhm.
you. Whereas if we try to learn something in a few weeks, the odds of that sticking and being a part of who we really are and our skill set are a lot lower.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Gabe, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast today. I'll look forward to seeing you in our next Titans meeting. But that's all for today's episode of From the Trenches. I'm sure that you got some gold nuggets out of this. You'll probably want to go back and listen to it again, or to get the transcript. And if you're looking to supercharge your email marketing, check out my book, Hit the Inbox, at hittheinboxbook.com. It's packed with 76 pages of strategies to get your emails landing in inboxes and driving sales. Thanks for tuning in today. If you found value in this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite platform. It helps us reach more entrepreneurs like you. And until next time, keep crushing it in the trenches.